On the star station Aurora Prime, life moved fast. Ships landed and departed. Alarms rang and blinked, and the hum of machinery filled every corridor. Yet amidst all this motion, one figure moved as though the chaos did not exist. Lyra, an alien scientist with pale blue skin and glowing violet eyes, strode down the hallway, her long fingers brushing against the railing. She carried a datapad, her mind fully focused on her work, unaware of the curious glances from other crew members. Lyra had a reputation. She was brilliant, one of the youngest engineers ever to design a hyperdrive system, but also cold and distant. Her demeanor had earned her respect, yes, but also a wall of isolation. Other aliens avoided sitting near her, avoiding her gaze, avoiding her presence altogether. Some whispered that she was too proud, too stubborn, and too focused on her own work to care about anyone else. Lyra did not care. She preferred it this way. Silence allowed her to think, to focus, to create. Tonight she entered the engineering hub, the heart of the station, where glowing panels and humming reactors filled the room with a faint golden light. The hub was mostly empty. Most of the night crew had gone to rest, leaving Lyra alone. She scanned the hyperdrive reactor diagnostics, her brow furrowing. Something was wrong. A warning light flashed faintly, and readings showed that a minor fault could quickly turn into a catastrophic malfunction. Lyra sighed and tapped the datapad, reviewing the reactor schematics. She had encountered problems before, but this was different. It wasn't a simple error in alignment or wiring. Something about the energy distribution was off, subtle but dangerous. If it escalated, the hyperdrive could overload, damaging the station or worse. She had no time for mistakes. She began adjusting the system manually, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. Sparks of light reflected in her eyes as she traced the fault through the reactor network. Time passed, silent but heavy. Sweat dotted her forehead. Despite her skill, she felt a twinge of frustration. Usually she could fix anything, but the reactor seemed to resist her logic. The quiet hum of machinery was suddenly interrupted by a soft sound, the click of a boot step. Lyra glanced up, expecting to see one of the other engineers scurrying past. Instead, she saw a human standing at the edge of the hub. He looked ordinary, messy brown hair, simple uniform, but there was something in his posture that made her pause. He did not speak. He did not ask for permission. He simply walked over and, without a word, sat down on the bench beside her. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Humans were not common on Aurora Prime. They were known for their boldness, sometimes even recklessness, and many of the alien crew considered them inexperienced. Yet this one sat calmly beside her, without hesitation, without asking, and without making a sound. "I can help," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost as if he were unsure he should speak. Lyra raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She did not need help, she thought. She could handle this herself. The human, Ethan, simply opened a small toolkit beside him and began examining the reactor panels with a careful hand. He did not touch her work without asking, but he did not hesitate to make small adjustments when necessary. Lyra watched, fascinated despite herself. His movements were precise, his understanding intuitive. He seemed to notice what she had missed, pointing to subtle misalignments she hadn't seen. "You're fast," she said finally, her voice low and measured. "I try to follow the system," Ethan replied simply. Lyra frowned, unsure why she felt a spark of curiosity. She had never needed anyone's help before, and yet, here he was, silent and steady, working beside her as if he belonged. Time passed. The reactor's warning lights grew brighter, indicating the malfunction was worsening. Lyra and Ethan moved together, their hands sometimes brushing, sometimes working in tandem on different components. He handed her tools before she even asked, adjusted circuits she hadn't realized were off, and always maintained a calm, focused presence. She realized something she had never admitted. She felt relief. Relief that someone understood the machinery as she did. Relief that she was no longer entirely alone. Relief that someone did not fear her brilliance but instead matched it quietly. Other crew members occasionally passed by the hub, stopping to watch. Whispers rippled through the corridors. The human. Working with Lyra? He can keep up. No one's ever done that before. But neither Lyra nor Ethan noticed them. They were too absorbed in the reactor, too focused on the task at hand. The fault in the hyperdrive was stubborn. Each time they thought they had fixed it, Another warning signal blinked red. Sparks flickered from one panel. Smoke curled faintly and a low hum became a tremor through the floor. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, checking stabilizers and recalibrating energy flows. Ethan mirrored her movements, occasionally reaching for a component before she did, sometimes correcting a misalignment she hadn't noticed. For the first time, Lyra felt the weight of urgency not as pressure alone but as a shared responsibility. She realized that together, they were stronger than alone. She glanced at Ethan once and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. He did not speak, but the gesture conveyed trust. The tension escalated. A sharp alarm rang through the hub. The energy levels in the reactor spiked unexpectedly. Lyra's heart raced. If she didn't act quickly, the hyperdrive could overload, sending a shockwave through the station. She directed a flow of power to the stabilizers while Ethan monitored the core output, adjusting the energy valves in sync with her commands. Seconds felt like hours. Sweat ran down Lyra's temples. Sparks flew. Red lights pulsed across the console. She realized with a jolt that she had never worked this closely with anyone before. The intimacy of shared focus, the unspoken communication was something entirely new. And she liked it, though she would never admit it aloud. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the reactor began to stabilize. The warning lights dimmed. The hum of the machinery returned to its normal cadence. Lyra exhaled, leaning back for a moment, her chest heaving. Ethan, silent as always, simply sat beside her, watching the reactor readings return to normal. "You did well," Lyra said finally. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Ethan shrugged. "We did well," Lyra paused. She wasn't used to the pronoun "we" being used in reference to her. She had always worked alone, always solved problems herself. Yet somehow it felt right. The other engineers filtered into the hub, murmuring in disbelief. Some shook their heads, others looked on with admiration. A human had not only worked alongside Lyra, but had helped prevent a disaster that could have destroyed half the station. No one had expected it. Lyra didn't notice their reactions. She was too focused on Ethan, too aware of his steady presence beside her. He had not spoken much, but his actions had communicated more than words ever could. For the rest of the night, they worked side by side, checking the reactor and making minor adjustments. Lyra began to understand that there was something remarkable about humanity. The human mind was flexible, adaptable, and fearless in ways that her species often was not. Ethan had approached a situation that could have caused panic, and instead acted with quiet confidence and calm precision. When the first rays of Aurora Prime's artificial sun began to illuminate the station, Lyra finally allowed herself a small smile. She had faced countless crises in her life, but this one felt different. She had not faced it alone. She had not solved it alone. For the first time in a long time, she felt connected. Ethan, sensing the shift, simply nodded, gathering his tools. He did not seek praise or recognition. He did not speak of his success. He simply did what he had done from the beginning, acted without words, letting his work speak for him. Lyra watched him leave the hub for a moment before turning back to the reactor. Her eyes lingered on the human's empty seat, the quiet space beside her that had been filled with presence and trust. She realized something profound. Perhaps strength did not always lie in solitude. Perhaps some battles, some problems, were meant to be faced together. As she walked back to her quarters, Lyra felt a flicker of anticipation. She did not know what would happen next, nor did she know how to interpret the strange, comforting presence of the human beside her. But one thing was certain, she would not forget him, and she would not forget the way he had silently changed her world. The station continued to buzz with life, indifferent to the quiet bond forming in the engineering hub. Yet, somewhere deep in Lyra's mind, a new thought took root. Perhaps humans were capable of more than she had ever imagined. Perhaps one of them, this one, was capable of changing her life without a single word. And as the morning shift began and crew members filed past the hub, Lyra found herself hoping that the human would return. Not because she needed help, she did not, but because, for the first time, she understood the value of someone simply being there, beside her, without expectation, without judgment, without words. The reactor hummed steadily, the danger averted. But for Lyra, the real change was not in the machinery. It was in the quiet, steady presence beside her. A presence that had no name, no title, no obligation. A presence that had somehow begun to matter. The next day on Aurora Prime, the station was alive with its usual bustle. Crew members moved with purpose, checking consoles, repairing systems, and preparing ships for departure. Lyra entered the engineering hub expecting the quiet isolation she usually found, but the space felt different. She realized she had grown accustomed to the absence of others, yet her thoughts kept drifting to the human engineer who had silently helped her the previous night. Ethan. She found him already at his station, adjusting the calibration of a minor energy conduit. He looked up as she entered, giving her a small nod, the same quiet acknowledgement as before. No words were exchanged, yet Lyra felt a sense of relief. The presence beside her was comforting, a silent partnership forming without fanfare. Today, the hub faced another challenge. A shipment of high-energy plasma cells had arrived from another station, and several of them were unstable. One careless misstep could cause a chain reaction across the storage bay, endangering the entire star station. Lyra quickly analyzed the shipment and noticed subtle fluctuations in energy readings. She was prepared to address it alone, as she always had, but she found her gaze drifting toward Ethan. He noticed her look and walked over without speaking, his hand steady as he examined the plasma cells with her. Together they moved methodically. Lyra adjusted the energy stabilizers while Ethan monitored the pressure valves. The coordination between them felt natural, almost instinctive. Despite coming from different worlds, their minds worked in harmony. Other engineers observed, murmuring under their breath. Humans were often underestimated on Aurora Prime, seen as impulsive and fragile, but Ethan's quiet efficiency challenged that perception. He did not boast. He did not seek recognition, yet he handled the dangerous plasma cells with a calm precision that earned the respect of all watching. Hours passed as they stabilized the shipment. Sparks flew occasionally from faulty conduits and alarms blared at intervals, but Ethan remained composed. Lyra found herself trusting him completely. His presence allowed her to focus, to think more clearly, to see solutions she might have missed alone. She realized that his human perspective, practical, adaptable, and fearless, was complementing her analytical mind perfectly. By the time the last plasma cell was secured, Lyra and Ethan were exhausted, their uniforms smudged with grease and plasma residue, yet a quiet satisfaction hung in the air. They had prevented disaster together. Lyra finally allowed herself a small smile, a rare expression of acknowledgement toward someone else. "You make this easier," she said softly, almost unsure if she should speak. Ethan glanced at her, his expression calm. "We make it work." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Lyra nodded, realizing that she had never before worked with anyone who truly understood her rhythm, her focus, and her methods. She had been isolated by her own brilliance, feared and respected, but never truly partnered with. Ethan had changed that, not with speech, but with quiet competence and trust. Later, in the observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays, Lyra sat alone, watching the ships come and go. She usually preferred solitude, but today felt different. Ethan joined her without announcement, sitting beside her in silence. She noticed how effortlessly he fit into the space beside her, not crowding her, not seeking attention, just present. They watched the stars together. Lyra marveled at the human ability to remain calm, to observe, and to act when necessary. It was a stark contrast to her species, who often overanalyzed, debated, and hesitated. Ethan's quiet confidence inspired her, challenging her assumptions about humans and their place among the stars. Their partnership continued over the following weeks. Aurora Prime faced numerous technical challenges: malfunctioning reactors, failing navigation systems, and unstable energy grids. In each crisis, Lyra and Ethan worked together seamlessly, their silent communication becoming almost instinctive. They anticipated each other's moves, completed each other's adjustments, and corrected errors before they could escalate. The other crew members could not ignore it. Whispers spread through the station. The human engineer was extraordinary, capable of keeping pace with Lyra and complementing her genius. Respect turned into admiration, and admiration into a quiet awe. Yet Lyra paid little attention to these murmurs. Her focus remained on the work and increasingly on the human beside her. One evening, a critical alarm blared through the station. The hyperdrive reactor, recently repaired, showed irregular energy fluctuations again. Lyra rushed to the hub with Ethan already there. They exchanged a quick glance, a silent agreement passing between them. There was no hesitation, no debate, just action. Working side by side, they traced the irregularity to a microfracture in the hyperdrive's energy core. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting energy while Ethan stabilized the core using a technique she had not considered. The two of them moved in perfect synchronization, their minds working as one despite the differences in species, culture, and experience. As the alarm continued to blare, Lyra felt an unfamiliar emotion: trust. She trusted Ethan completely, more than she had ever trusted anyone. And he in turn trusted her. It was not spoken aloud, yet the understanding between them was undeniable. Finally, the reactor stabilized. The alarm ceased and the hum of machinery returned to its steady rhythm. Lyra exhaled, leaning against the console for a moment, her body tense from hours of focused work. Ethan, ever calm, simply nodded at her, acknowledging their success without fanfare. The station's crew applauded quietly, recognizing the duo's extraordinary achievement. Yet Lyra barely noticed. Her attention was on the human beside her. For the first time, she realized that brilliance alone was not enough. Collaboration, trust, and silent understanding were equally powerful. In the quiet aftermath, Lyra and Ethan remained in the hub, checking systems, making minor calibrations. Words were few, but their actions spoke volumes. Lyra realized that she did not feel alone anymore. Ethan's presence had filled a space she hadn't known was empty, bringing not only skill but also companionship and understanding. Days passed, and their bond deepened. The station faced routine challenges, but with each problem, Lyra and Ethan grew more attuned to each other's methods. Their silent communication became almost a language of its own, each action conveying intent and understanding. Lyra began to feel something she had long denied, a sense of connection, a rare comfort in the presence of another being who matched her mind and respected her work. The human crew members began to take note. They were inspired by Ethan's calm efficiency and Lyra's brilliance. Other species, too, began to reassess their assumptions about humans. The quiet, competent engineer had shown that humanity's strength was not in brute force or flashy displays, but in adaptability, intelligence, and courage under pressure. One morning, as Aurora Prime orbited a distant star, Lyra and Ethan sat in the observation deck once more. Ships streaked past the station's docking ports, and the artificial sun bathed the room in warm light. Lyra felt a rare ease in her chest. For the first time, she did not feel the weight of isolation pressing on her shoulders. She was not alone. Ethan did not speak, but he did not need to. His quiet presence beside her was enough. Lyra realized that words were unnecessary when trust, understanding, and shared purpose were already present. Humanity, she thought, had a unique way of bridging gaps, connecting even the most distant minds through action, calmness, and silent support. The station buzzed with life around them. Yet in that small corner of the observation deck, time seemed to slow. Lyra glanced at Ethan, a small smile touching her lips. He looked back, his eyes steady and kind. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Their partnership, their understanding, and their shared triumphs had created something far stronger than simple friendship or collaboration. Lyra finally spoke, softly. "Thank you." Ethan merely nodded, a simple acknowledgement of the connection they shared. It was enough. Words had never been his way, and she had learned that presence, action, and trust could speak louder than anything else. In that quiet moment, Lyra understood something fundamental about humanity. They were adaptable, resilient, and capable of silent courage that inspired those around them. They could build bridges where others saw walls, create understanding where others saw only difference, and act decisively when the world demanded it. Ethan was living proof of that truth. Aurora Prime continued its orbit, stars glittering beyond the observation windows. Lyra and Ethan sat together not as alien and human, not as scientist and engineer, but as partners who had discovered something rare and valuable: trust, understanding, and the quiet strength of presence. For Lyra, the world had changed in the span of a single night. A human had entered her space, worked beside her, and shown her that connection could exist without words, that brilliance could be complemented by courage, and that isolation could be overcome through simple, steadfast companionship. And as the artificial sun cast long shadows across the observation deck, Lyra realized that she would never forget the human engineer who had sat beside her without a word, and in doing so, had changed her world forever.